Hey everyone, 2023 was an amazing year for stories, Fontaine arc in Genshin, the Bellabog arc in Star Rail, Cienjo sucks, so yeah, we're not going to talk about that. And then in Arc Knights, we had Chapter 12, Chapter 11, Lone Trail, so there were just amazing stories to read. It was a reader's heaven, but there was still, like, among all these stories that I experienced last year, there was one story that stood out, and that was FGO's Lostbelt 6. And call me a simp for Fate stuff, call me biased for it, I don't care, but personally, I think Lostbelt 6, Avalon le Fae, is like it's obviously the best story ever released last year, but it's also one of the best stories that I've ever read. And like, it's insane. I've been playing FGO since like 2021, I think November of 2021, and I've experienced everything: the singularities, the Grand Order, Camelot, Solomon, pretty peak stories, Babylonia as well. Then we came to the Lost Belts. Each Lost Belt has been just better than the previous one. Anastasia, Gota Damarang, Sin. Then we had Yukshetra, Olympus, Atlantis, everything. It's been an amazing journey. But I don't know why, but this Lost Belt 6, Avalon le Fae, just hit differently. It was still a Fate story. It was very much core to what we have in FGO and stuff, but still, it stood out. It stood out. Why? Because I felt that it could have also worked as a standalone story. Just make a limited series out of this. An animated movie, a 3-part movie, a trilogy, or give it a full-fledged 26 episode season, anime season, or something like that, and it can stand on its own. You don't need to have previous knowledge of everything related to FGO's story to actually enjoy the story, because the story is also self-contained. It involves scripters, the big bads of Cosmos and the Lost Belt, but it doesn't heavily involve them. All the past Lost Belts, we have a Lost Belt King and their crypto heavily involved in the story. It's like the big bad that you have to defeat. But in Avalon le Fae, I felt like it was more of the story of Fairy Britain. You were reading the story of the Fae. You were reading of how Morgan saved the land in her own way. She didn't actually save it, but in her own way, she preserved Britain as best as she could. It tells you a story about how a king who felt betrayed came back to get revenge. It tells the story of how a knight who loves everyone, but she cannot seem to, progress in that love. It's about a story of a girl who just wants the affection of a mother. And then it's also about the story of a girl who was burdened with the prophecy of having to save Britain, even though she didn't want to, even though her entire goal was to just make friends and live out a happy life, but she was burdened with it. And that's why I think it's one of the greatest stories. Apart from the fact that it has saber faces, you have Muramasa as a Shiro face, you have Da Vinci, who's actually a pretty, up till now, Da Vinci has always been a hologram. She hasn't actively been present in majority of the Lost Belt and stuff, but in Lost Belt 6 she was there, so it felt like we have an OG cast member with us. MASH was there as well. Nemo and Holmes were pretty much missing, but yeah, we can ignore those guys for now. And then we had this marvelous character in Oberon. This is this peak of a character, absolutely next level. It's kind of hilarious and mind-blowing, honestly. It's honestly not hilarious, it's just mind-blowing how the author Nasu, who actually wrote Fate Stay Night as well. It's like I have mad respect for the man. I mean, apart from the the sex scenes, the story is good, but in the mind of him, like he just saw it initially. Like I've read about this. Initially, Lostbelt 6 was just a big bad versus good guy kind of stuff. You defeat Morgan, she's the Lostbelt king, and the Lostbelt resolves itself, like almost every other Lostbelt that he fought. But then he saw Oberon, and then he just completely rewrote the story to make Oberon big bad. And like, I have no idea what the initial story was. I would have liked to read, a draft of it, but what we got was out of this world. It was insane. I mean, the amount of study that goes into crafting Fate stories is actually one of my favorite parts, because I love it when people mix mythology with real life stuff. That's what attracted me to the concept of Fate first, like using mythological characters, using people who were renowned in the past, who have been in our history books, and summoning them into the modern world, using them as maybe you want to use them as your servants, you want to use them as your friends, or you just want to use them as tools of war, whatever you want. But the concept was amazing. It's like Percy Jackson, honestly. Like, when the Greek gods come to modern world, how is it like? So that's why I got attracted to Fate that way. Mainly FGO. But with Avalon le Fae, it's not just a story of just having to save the world, even though it is indeed, but it's also a story showing you how cruel, like, it's not always sunshines and rainbows, and it's not always the good guys are good and the bad guys are bad. It's a very morally grey story. Like, you have Beryl in this story, you have Pepe, who was actually a friend of ours, Pepe, who actually once was against us, but then he sacrificed himself to save us. Beryl, who was obsessed with MASH, and Beryl can go fuck himself. He's the number one asshole in the entire FGO community. I hate Beryl. But yeah, apart from that, Beryl, we have Morgan's story with her being Asec, with having Totorot before. For Habitrod, we had Totorot, Asec and Totorot story, along with this one other knight that I'm not quite remembering his name, but yeah, we had another knight, and then we had MASH over there as well. And then how that played out in a similar way in the future for for our girl Castoria. And we had Odin in between. And then you see the story is divided into 3 parts, where the first part you just you enter Fae Britain and you're like, wow, this is like a paradise. I don't know why people want to destroy it. Even the Lostbelt tree that erupted over here just disappeared for some reason, although we know it later that Morgan was the one who actually utilized everything and just destroyed it to preserve Fae Britain. But what was I saying? Yeah, part 1 dealt with how beautiful Fairy Britain looks like. The people are helpful, people are kind, but then you realize that there's one odd thing, that there are no humans, and that's what takes you, because you are human. And then the story starts to unravel itself. You have the Moor situation coming up, you have how fairies are at war with one another. You read about how Morgan has the tax for basically living. Like, you exist, so you have to pay a tax, a blood tax. And it's insane. Like, it's not, like I said, it's not all sunshines and rainbows. And then part 1 ends with the calamity at Norwich, where the big bad reveal finally, like, there's basically a calamity, and that's only a teaser of what's to come. It's like only a teaser. You have an AoE berserker enemy dealing curse damage, and you're like, okay, it can't get worse than this, right? Well, boy, that was just a teaser. But still, the story, the fights were epic. The music was absolutely phenomenal. Coming down, you get part 2, where you dive into further more characters. You have more backstory on Barghest, on Sith, on Melusine, and the other characters, Oberon's supposed background. Then you have how Muramasa came up, more info on Castoria, Morgan's story essentially. And then, part 2 ends with, having to kill Morgan. And also I forgot, you have Knock-na-Riab as well. Knock-na-Riab being Lady Meb, or how you want to call him. I just call him Meb because I think the D is silent. But yeah, Meb is Knock-na-Riab, and she is also against Morgan. So you team up with her, and it's a nice story. She wants to become the fake queen, succeeding Morgan because she was entitled to the throne. And it's like a complicated fantasy story, which is actually amazing. It's kind of like Game of Thrones. I mean, not exactly Game of Thrones, but you get a similar vibe of it, with it being set in Britain. You have the royalty stuff, you have these mythological stuff, knights and sword battles, and then fairies, magic, stuff like that. Something right out of a fantasy book. And then, part 2 just ends with you defeating Morgan. And then that's when you realize, you don't realize it then, but part 3 happens. And then in part 3, I think it was in the early beginning, and you see the fairies actually revolt and they kill Meb, Knock-na-Riab. And that's when you see how everything just falls down. That's when you realize how hard Morgan kept to, preserve this land, and how hard-working she indeed was. And even though she's a big bad, even though with time she grew colder and colder and crueler, but still in the end she just wanted her Britain to live on. That was her ultimate goal. And you see how it all just crumbles down, like a parasite eating inside you, eating you from the inside. That's how Lostbelt 6 Fairy Britain was. The people just ate the land themselves. They just destroyed it. And then all hell broke loose. Melusine goes mad, Barghest goes mad, Sith dies, Morgan dies. You have the Beast of Calamity that you saw in part 1, right? Now he's a big fluffy boy. I know, he's much more dangerous now because he is actually Kurnanos, and he harbors a great hatred for the fairies. Simply because the fairies betrayed that man. And that's another story, because you have this in-depth story on how the fairies actually are the real evil beings of the entire story. You have Oberon, you have Morgan, you have everything, but in the end, it's the fairies that ruined everything from the very beginning. You have Aurora. I don't think I've even mentioned her, but Aurora is the number one. It's like Cersei. She's like Cersei. But you just love to hate her. And that's why she's an amazing character. You just love to hate her. After that, Kurnanos, you fight the big bad, you fight a giant hound, which is basically Barghest, because she can't control her curse anymore. She's the black dog. And you summon the round table. You have this epic fight with Gawain and Lancelot and Mash trying to take down Barghest. You have this epic fight against Albion, which is basically Melusine, on top of the storm border, where you have to it's a really nice fight because you have to protect the storm border while defeating 3 bars, while destroying 3 bars of Albion. After that, you get the big bad boss, the Kurnanos boss fight, which is I think one of the toughest boss fights in the entire game so far. I think if anything, Demeter is a tie with Kurnanos, but I feel since Demeter has a class advantage, she's a caster, so you can just bring out any single target rider and they can deal a good amount of damage. They can resist even as well. With Kurnanos, the man is a berserker, and if you don't have foreigners, you're basically toast. And if you do have foreigners, well, Kurnanos literally applies stacks stacks of curse on you. You attack Kronos, he applies a stack on you. He attacks you, he applies a stack of curse on you. Now, even though that's curable, how far can you cure it? Can you cure your characters? And that's what made the Kronos boss fight like scary, but truly epic. Like, if given the chance, I would love to re-experience the entirety of Lostbelt 6 all over again. It's just that amazing of a story. And that's not the end of it, after the Kronos boss fight, after, Castoria sacrifices herself to save everyone. It's just, I don't know, man, you get the Oberon reveal. And that's when it all clicks in, he was the one controlling everything. He was the one, he was the mastermind behind it all. He was manipulating the faeries. He was the one who was orchestrating the entire plan to crumble Fairy Britain. And he actually did it. It was insane. It was insane. The Oberon boss fight was actually pretty epic as well, where you summon Artoria, Avalon. And there's damn interesting story about it, because right before the Albion boss fight, you actually go to Avalon, legit the Avalon, the Garden of Avalon, the place where Merlin is trapped. Even in mythology, it's said that Merlin is trapped in Avalon, overlooking everything. He can see the past, present, future, but he's just stuck there in Avalon. And you legit go to Avalon, you have Merlin, you forge Excalibur. Muramasa, who supported you, becomes the essence to forge the sword Excalibur, which then becomes the sword of Artoria, Avalon. Oh, just thinking about it, it's insane. It's so epic. And then with the Oberon boss fight, you summon Artoria, Avalon, and then even then, lore wise, it's epic. You can imagine the story, but when you're playing the game and then you see that forced support unit, and in that forced support unit you have a level 120 NP5 Artoria Avalon that's got a story buff, which is basically every turn she gives the party an attack buff and an NP gain. Basically your first skill runs almost every turn or every 2 turns, and it's just, you see how epic the boss fight is with Oberon, and you have all these emotions running inside it because you're reading the story. Oh my god. And then in the end, when the dust settles, I think that was the part when I actually, throughout the story I didn't shed a tear. When Meb died, I'm not saying Nocnariab died, I felt sad, but I felt angry as well. And then we had plenty of deaths in this entire story arc. Pepe died, but I didn't actually cry. But the moment that I actually shed a tear was during the end of the story, when you're atop the storm border and you're leaving the Lostbelt, when you're leaving Fey Britain, and then Da Vinci comes out and Mash comes out, and they just tell you that the sky has turned blue. And I don't know why, but it was that moment that it struck me. We've been playing Lostbelt 6 for the past 2 months or so, and you had this twilight sky with this beautiful yellow and orange color with slight shades of purple, and then it's just over, and you're back. You finished it. Even though it's a relief, but that story that you finish, it's like when you read a good book, an interesting book, and then when you finally finish it, and then you feel that loneliness, when you feel that emptiness inside of you, damn, what should I do now? I was so engrossed in the story, I was so engrossed in the world that it had created, and then now you're just empty, you just have nothing left to do. And that's actually what I felt after reading Lostbelt 6, and which is why I would actually recommend everyone, if you're a Fate fan, if you're not a Fate fan, if you know even the basics of Fate, or you're just an enjoyer of stories in general, just try to like read it. Although obviously I've spoken a lot of spoilers here, so it's more like, for the people who have actually read the story or who don't mind spoilers. But yeah, I'll probably add a spoiler warning in the beginning of the video. But yeah, I feel people should actually read Lostbelt 6. Even if you don't have no interest in playing the gacha game. I'm not forcing you, it's terrible. FGO sucks as hell. But the story, just Lostbelt 6, it's good enough. It's good enough. Like, it's one of the most peak stories ever written. I don't know why, but it just feels so epic on all different levels. You got your first pretender servant. You had so many reveals. You had, Tamlins, which are basically fairy knights. It was just so epic. You had these special boss fight animations, with the bell gong and the fiery animations and the sprites and the buffs. You for the first time, I think people saw a level 100 NP5 mash. We had Galahad projecting his power through mash, and even in the JP side, you basically have an NP4 and a level 90 mash right now. Is it NP4, NP3 still? But yeah, you don't get the Grail mashed up to level 100, so that's also one thing that, Avalon le Fae gave us, a level 100 NP5 mash, the dream. And that's probably going to be the final servant that we get, after we finish Cosmos and the Lostbelt. It's obviously Mash has got to become NP5 at some point. But yeah, that's why, I think it's one of the most epic stories ever written. And I was more motivated to create this, talk about this story, because now I, at least on my NA account, except Percival, I own every Lostbelt 6 servant, and up till now I didn't have Morgan, so I didn't feel the energy to just praising Morgan, because she just shafted me so hard last year on both her banners, 450 plus F2P SQ down the drain, no Morgans. I mean, just got one Barghest, one Sith on the first banner, and then on the second banner just got one Sith. It was rough, but now that I have everyone, gacha has been kind. Obviously, Melusine with the first multi, Oberon with the first multi, got Koyanskaya, the light Koyanskaya dark on singles. Muramasa also, he just came after spending 480 SQ last year on the new year, but still Castoria and all. There's actual love for these characters, and I know many people say Lostbelt 6 has become overrated, but as a story, I think it's still one of the best stories ever written. And I don't think it's overrated. I think it's very much, in line with what to expect. If people say it's epic, it's indeed epic. Now, the summer event that we had, the summer Avalon le Fae, I have no thoughts on that because I actually didn't read it. I'm gonna read it next year when it comes to NA. But as for now, Lostbelt 6 just clears everything in the game, and it's also FGO's emergency funds tactically. When the funds are getting low for the month, release that Castoria banner, release that Morgan banner, or release just any goddamn Lostbelt 6 banner, and you're just good to go. But yeah, that's where we end this this little thought opinion on Avalon le Fae. And if you haven't read it, just go read it. There's a whole playthrough of it on YouTube. It's a visual novel. You don't have to fight. You can just see the fight scenes from other content creators, but just go and play it. It's amazing. Just go and read it. It's amazing. You won't be disappointed. And yeah, that's where I'm gonna end this. Thanks for watching. After this, I gotta go fetch tons of Lostbelt 6 photos for this video. So yeah, see you later. Please subscribe if you enjoyed this, and have a great day. Goodbye.